Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3 Iron, and welcome to today's discussion where we are talking about what is bannable. There's a lot of drama that has come up over the last week or so with the release of Ultimatum, and so today we're going to discuss some of it. A whole lot of people have weighed in on this. A lot of people even voted. I put out a poll. And a lot of people said, hey, don't even talk about this, Iron. But the thing that convinced me to actually take the little bit of hobby time that I have to discuss this is because I really didn't see people approaching this topic in the way how I was thinking about it. So hopefully this is a unique perspective or a different perspective than what you've heard elsewhere. So today we're going to be discussing crime and punishment within the best damn RPG in the history of the world. Those of you who are new, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell. And I'm always happy to read your comments down below and interact with any thoughts, opinions, or corrections that you've got for me in the comments. So what exactly happened and why are so many people buzzing at the moment about POE and about bans in POE? Well, Ultimatum launched on 4/16 with a ton of different server issues, which is now becoming more and more the norm for Path of Exile on releases. We used to think it was relatively bad with maybe the 3.5 like betrayal expansion kind of change around of things, but it just seems like things are consistently inconsistent on weekend launches now. That seems to be more and more the habit, where we've got long delays, long downtimes, long priority queues, which the whole priority queue thing is a new thing altogether. But anyway, in general, when things go poorly during opening weekends, that increases the amount of tension within inside the player base. So we all have shorter fuses and are quicker to respond, react, and critique in the midst of various issues that come up when we can't play the game that we're excited to play. And when we've been building expectation for a new release and for new content. And that's exactly what Path of Exile thrives on, is building up a player base that is excited to play new content. And then when release day comes, if we don't get to play it, yeah, of course, everybody's going to be a bit more anxious. Everybody's going to be a bit more upset, not only about the server issues, but then also have, anger spillage, as it were, into various topics. So Ultimatum launched with a new queue priority, giving preferential treatment to certain players with inside the player base. To some extent, that makes sense, right? There's a whole lot of players who get a whole lot of views on a whole lot of platforms that help promote the game and bring in, I assume, a whole bunch of money for grinding gear games as essentially free promotion. So on the one hand, priority queue for streamers who are showing off the game makes sense. But I think in general, this actually exacerbates anxiety within the community and moves the game of Path of Exile itself from a product to be played into a product that is to be watched. In other words, the more we do these sorts of things where I shouldn't say we, the more Grinding Gear Games does these things that prioritizes or that emphasizes that there are professional streamers who make a living playing this game, and the more the game is catered towards that portion of the player base, then the more the game itself is enjoyable as a watchable product to watch the players who are professional and who can put their entire day into the game, versus players who only get to play as many hours as they get to play, but aren't necessarily professionals, aren't necessarily streamers, aren't necessarily people who are living and dying by the content that comes out on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis from GGG. So I think by releasing the priority queue in conjunction with the server issues, anxiety is already high in the player base because of the server issues, and then anxiety gets raised again as there is this very clear division, a very clear split. Now, that's official in Grinding Gear Games' mind in priority queues. Hey, are you a player who is worthy of getting into our game or not? That's legitimately how easy it comes down to. It's you're either on the VIP list and you're going to get pushed through the queue quicker, or you're not and you have to wait. So I think that also contributes to the amount of anxiety that's in just the general player base at the moment. Then the new Ultimatum mechanic allowed for farming on a grand scale. That's what I'm going to call it, farming on a grand scale in a group at rather minimal cost. So oftentimes when farming in groups, there are groups who farm on a grand scale, but there's often a cost to it. There's often a trade-off. There's often even a build-up that you need to get to in order to be able to farm on a grand scale. And in Ultimatum, there was what GGG has deemed to be an exploit that allowed players to farm on a grand scale without necessarily costing anything, simply interacting with the mechanic. And that was a no-no. And so that's led to some of these players who got into priority queue and who are high-profile players to then be banned. So the technique was used heavily by a couple of players. There were 20 accounts specifically that were banned, and then it was displayed and distributed within the community with multiple videos, multiple stream clips, and multiple just examples of how to replicate this particular technique. So GGG, the POE's makers, Grinding Gear Games, they, in response to this technique that was shown, banned these 20 players. And the quote is that they used this exploit multiple times. So that's the summary of what's happened and why people are buzzing. So now let's actually get into the nitty-gritty of it. How did Grinding Gear Games respond to this abuse in-game? Well, Chris posted on April 20th, earlier today, we learned of a bug in Ultimatum that allows players to generate excessive rewards. Shortly after its discovery, we deployed a hotfix that capped the amount of experience and items that Ultimatums could yield. We have banned 20 accounts that abuse this exploit multiple times. These bans will last until Ultimatum ends in July. We will also void the characters they made in Ultimatum so that they and their items will not be transferred to their parent leagues. If you uncover an exploit in Path of Exile and abuse it for your benefit, we will ban you. So pretty straightforward and simple response, right? Like, hey, if you exploit something in our game, we're going to ban you. On the one hand, like judicially, legally, authoritatively, I've got no problem with this, right? Grinding Gear Games are the ones who own, operate, and design and have all the intentions and dreams for Path of Exile. They're the ones who are creating the game. They get a say in who gets to play and who doesn't. So on the one hand, that's fine. That's great. Ban anybody you want. Ban me, ban anybody for any arbitrary reason that you want. However, when we start to use qualifiers like the word exploit, that's where I start to scratch my head, because Path of Exile is filled with all sorts of things that could be deemed exploits or could be deemed clever uses of in-game mechanics. So at this point in the discussion, I've got the question, how are players supposed to know what's bannable? What is the tangible, distinctive difference between a clever use of an in-game mechanic that develops a technique, maybe that wasn't thought of, that wasn't tested, or that wasn't predicted by the designers, and an exploit that the designers then say is bannable? What's the difference? And the reality is, so far, this is at least my opinion, so I shouldn't say the reality is, in my opinion, Grinding Gear Games has not done enough to differentiate between those two things. We as a player base are left to read the minds of Grinding Gear Games on whether or not something is an exploit or whether or not something is a technique. So how is it that players might know this? Well, you might say the terms of service, right? We all sign off on the terms of service every time there's an update to the terms of service, every time there's a game update, every time you re-download the game. You click on, yep, accept and play. In the terms of service, under Article 7, it says, under no circumstances without the prior written approval of Grinding Gear Games may you adapt, reproduce, store, distribute, print, display, publish, create works like this, right? Okay, great. That's copyright stuff. Modify, adapt, including through third-party and third-party tools, the game client or its data. Okay, that makes sense. So we're not allowed to bot, we're not allowed to interact and manipulate the game itself. Utilize any automated software or bots. Okay, again, very explicitly, no bots, nothing automated, nothing that interacts with the data or changes the game itself. Knowingly perform any actions that may cause the computers used to support the website, materials, and services to become overloaded or crash. Okay, so we can't make a crash on crit builds. Connect to the servers through any software other than the authorized game client. Okay, so we can't hack the servers. Use any data gathering or extraction tools or software to extract information from the website. Okay, that makes sense. Use any meta tags or hidden text which incorporate GGG's name. Okay, yeah, again, IP, copyright stuff. Perform in-game services during the use of a website, materials, or services in any form of compensation outside of POE. Okay, so you can't RMT, you can't real money transaction, you can't say, hey, I'm going to do this thing for you outside of game, and or sorry, I'm going to do this thing for you inside of game, and you do this thing for me outside of game. Okay, totally get that. And then reverse engineer, decompile, or disassemble a website. Like, well, okay, more copyright, IP, intellectual property sort of stuff. Okay, that all makes sense. Nothing in here. I have not clipped this off to cut off anything. These are the list of restrictions in the terms of service. Nothing in here says, hey, we're going to ban you from playing our game. You're not allowed to do these things, which are use techniques in game, otherwise unintended by the developers. Now, you might say, okay, Iron, you're being absolutely pedantic. Oh, this should be a Kermit rant. Oh, Iron, you're being absolutely pedantic and making up all sorts of things. And that's like just the terms of service, man. Like, why would GGG say what they're going to ban people for in their terms of service? Well, because that's going to be one of the first places players are going to go to actually know what is and what is not permissible inside a game. It's going to be terms of service. That's one place that we can go. But that's not the end of it. Another way that players can know what's bannable versus what's simply unintended but clever use of in-game mechanics is previous history. So this is a particular post on Reddit from, I think it's 2 or 3 months ago now, by the time this video comes out, on a discussion about the Valdo's Rest Mirror and Exalted Shard farm and how it was being used and how it got changed. So there was apparently a bug, I'm not going to say exploit, there was a bug that was going on where basically players could be printing out 2 to 3 mirror shards per hour on a particular configuration. Now, here's the thing. The players who were involved and who displayed this and showed this off and made this known, none of those players during Ritual League that we know of were publicly banned. There was no public warning that was given out. It was simply, hey, it seemed to be that the outpouring of currency that was happening was gone in and fixed, and the unintended bug was fixed inside the game, but there were no necessarily punishments to players outside of the game. By the way, if you ever want to reference any of the stuff that I'm chatting about, terms of service or any of these Reddit links or any other discussions, they're all going to be linked down below in the video description. So you can just click expand and then go from there for all of these reference points. So here is one example where players could have been accused of generating a whole bunch of currency that wasn't necessarily intended with a mechanic and an interaction with a mechanic, and yet nobody got banned. All right, well, Iron, those aren't clear apples to apples comparisons. These are two different things. Ritual had been out for a while, and these were unintended mechanics that had been... Okay, yes, you're right. These are not apples to apples comparisons, but this is where players will go. If you're not looking at official Grinding Gear games communiques like the terms of service, then you're looking at previous history, and you're looking at what the company does. If you can't interpret a company's policy by what it says, then maybe you can interpret what its policy is by what it does. That's not an unreasonable approach to life. All right, so it doesn't end there with just this one example. GGG's historic pattern has been, and it's been quoted all over the place, it's a meme now inside the POE community, to abuse a mechanic early and to abuse it often. That is the meme, that is the phrase, that is the word of wisdom that players live by oftentimes, especially when a new mechanic comes out. So, during Delirium League in 2020, a GGG employee in charge of communication with the player base said to enjoy a particular build, the Herald Aura Stacker Guardian, for the duration of the league. That was on a Friday or a Thursday, depending on where you are in the globe. That players were getting worried that something that was being shown would get nerfed in league and would get changed, that it was perhaps an unintended exploit or a bug, and an official communication from a Grinding Gear Games employee, not just someone who wouldn't know better, but someone who's in charge of communication between the player base and the company, said, hey, enjoy it for the rest of the league. And then later on, literally 48 hours or 72 hours, basically when Grinding Gear Games all got back into the office for their work week, they then attempted to nerf that build. Now, it wasn't very effective. Players were still able to Cirrus Awakener 8 Cloud Dive with that build for that league. But here was a communique, an official statement from Grinding Gear Games that said, hey, yeah, enjoy that, whatever. And then just a few days later, oh, nope, actually, never mind. We're gonna try to kill that build. And we're going to try to change that particular approach. Okay, so the action here was, hey, our words say one thing, but our actions are actually going to do another thing, and nobody got banned. Nobody got banned during Delirium for cloud diving or for playing that particular build. The people who showed off that build, who showed off that bug, they didn't get banned. There was no public announcement from Grinding Gear Games from Chris saying, hey, if you do this, you're going to get banned, which is what has happened here with Ultimatum. All right, during Synthesis League in 2019, players could warp the usage of their distant memories for high reusage. This did not allow for infinite reuses of distant memories. Those of you who didn't play Synthesis, think of a distant memory kind of like a map. Imagine a high-value map that would be worth splitting, right? That would be worth reprinting and reusing, whether that's a heist contract or whether that's a map. Something that typically has an expenditure and a limit of uses. Basically, there was a way in Synthesis that was shown, that was displayed. Again, all the links are down below in the video description. There was a way to make it so that way you could use these very highly lucrative and highly valuable distant memories over and over and over and over and over again. Not quite infinitely. Eventually, they would run out. But there was a way to do this. There was a bug, an unintended game mechanic that Grinding Gear Games clearly did not intend, and nobody got banned for that. During Bestiary League in 2018, players could dupe with very minimal cost 6 links. There was no GGG announcement of bans or warnings about particular behavior leading to bans. Do you see the case that I'm building here? I think the refrigerator just kicked on. The refrigerator just kicked on. I just moved. Anyway, so maybe I'm being completely unreasonable here, but I think you see the pattern of behavior from Grinding Gear Games. Oftentimes, there are exploits or there are unintended mechanics that we as a player base discover, and there's no official ban, there's no official smackdown, there's no even official announcement about it. It's just we as players go back in, try it, and figure out that it was nerfed or changed. In March of 2017, players could force Monstrous Treasure to proc specifically, and Chris, in an email exchange with a player, said this was a bannable offense, and, quote, we will probably need to consolidate the rules to one place, yes. This is bannable for the same reason it is in other games, which most players seem to intuitively understand. I'll see if I can get someone to codify them. The last test case scenario that I'll bring up just for this discussion is that League Stones. League Stones had exploits that many called for a justifiable ban, and yet there was no official communication or traceable word that players were banned for that. This, in Ultimatum, seems to be a very, very public name and shame. Hey, these 20 accounts are getting banned for this thing that they're doing, and that seems to be maybe not quite unprecedented in Grinding Gear Games' approach for banning players, but it's darn near close. There's lots of other instances where GGG could have said something. Basically, once a year, Grinding Gear Games could come out and say something like this, or maybe even once a league could say, hey, this was not an intended mechanic. But they don't always. So what makes this case special? That's my question. What makes this particular case special in Ultimatum to justify banning players and then announcing about it? Like, what makes this approach and this particular timeline so special that it needs to be handled in this way? How is it that players, here's a question, how is it that players are supposed to recognize and differentiate between bannable offenses that are called exploits that we should intuitively understand and unintended interactions and mechanics that are just clever uses of gameplay? A whole bunch of Path of Exile is just clever uses of internal gameplay. Some of it's intended by GGG, but not all of it. Some of it is player-discovered play interactions that weren't necessarily original intentions that GGG has decided to adopt and allow for. Shoot, trade exists in the format that it exists right now because players came up with ways to ping the website and to refresh and to bring up the forums all the time with items that people were listing. Like, players in Path of Exile, one of the things that makes Path of Exile so very special is the relationship that Grinding Gear Games has with its player base, that it's got a player base that loves the game so much that they want to take their time, take their energy to help improve the game and help improve the quality of life around the game. And sometimes you're going to get smacked and you're going to get banned for finding things in game and then using them. Sometimes you're not going to get smacked and banned, and if you're not doing it, then you're not playing as efficiently as you could. You're not taking advantage of all of these different opportunities that you've got in game. So on the one hand, we may say, well, players, especially those who play the game for a living, like the people who got banned, many of them, they should just know. They should just know better. You should know. You know, we don't need it in the terms of service. We don't need it in our past history. You need to know intuitively what is and what is not a bannable thing. So maybe we're simply, expecting human beings from across multiple cultures, multiple age ranges, multiple languages, multiple religions, multiple forms of government, multiple individual life situations to all intuitively come to the same conclusions about what's bannable and what's clever. To me, that makes zero sense. That is a nonsensical argument. On the other hand, we may say, well, players who are given preferential treatment in priority queues ought to be given some special instructions so that way they can showcase to the community and be an example to exemplify for the community at large what is bannable and what is not. In other words, is GGG taking out these streamers who some of them were given priority queue or given priority status, right? Is GGG saying, hey, we've divided the player base up into players who get priority queue and players who don't. And the players who get priority queue, well, maybe they should at least be, have some kind of communication from GGG, some kind of warning. Hey, this is intended or this is not. Maybe they need to have a lifeline, and there's simply improved communication between Grinding Gear Games and that portion of the player base. Grinding Gear Games has already said there's a split in the player base. There's some players who are going to get in faster and other players who won't. That's okay. So be that. That's the decision Grinding Gear Games has made. That's what it's going to be. So at least communicate with those players. We all get that GGG can't communicate with the everyday casual player like me. We get that. But could we do a good job of communicating with the players who are playing the game all the time, doing it as a showcase? It's their living, and they're also doing it by helping promote Grinding Gear Games. Could there be a better line of communication between those two to give a warning, to give a heads up? And then you can say in your statement, if you need to ban those players, hey, we warned these guys and we told them, stop doing this. They didn't. We said, hey, pull down your stream clips or pull down your videos that are showing this exploit because we're going to fix it, we're going to nerf it, and anybody who does it will be banned. Nope. Instead, what they did was just ban the players. At least that's from what we know from the public communication. So hopefully this is an opportunity for GGG to improve. I hope I'm not coming off as just super critical and negative, and there's no way out of this or no solution. I think this is an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to grow and continue to strengthen relationship between GGG and its player base. I hope what I'm trying to convey is actually coming across. I'm not saying that GGG has done something terrible and atrocious and should, their banning policy is bad and they should feel bad. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying they could improve the way how they're communicating with the player base about how they make decisions about banning. So please, GGG, simply codify in your terms of service what is a bug and what is an exploit. POE is filled, nay, it is overflowing with bugs, and not all of them are exploits, and some of them become beloved features of what I think is the best damn ARPG in the world. So please, can you clearly state what a bug is, whether that's unintentional and it may or may not be fixed in the future, and what a bannable exploit is, like an unintentional use of a game mechanic that leads to undesired outcomes by the team at GGG. Those are two simple definitions right there, that a bug is unintentional and it may or may not be fixed in the future, but it's not a threat of being banned, versus an exploit, which is you're going to get banned for it and we didn't intend for this ever to be in the game. Like, those are two different things. Can we clarify between those two different things? Please, GGG, take these opportunities, and we've got multiple of them every single year. Like, not a league comes out that there isn't. You could just type in any league name into Google and just type in, name something, Metamorph exploit. Type in Bestiary exploit. Type in Prophecy League exploit. Like, you can type in anything, almost anything, and there's going to be a forum thread, a Reddit thread, a report thread, something about, hey, we figured out how to do this. We wanted to let you know. Or, hey, here's a clip of us doing this. Wanted to let you know. Or, hey, here's how I did this. Or, hey, do you wonder how much I'm making all of this currency? Or, hey, do you wonder why my items look this way? This is what I'm doing. Like, proven, repeatable actions that players are demonstrating and discussing. It comes up all the time. So we've got lots of opportunity to improve the communication between the player base and between the game designers. And that is always a good thing. And frankly, GGG, I think, does the best job out of any gaming company on the face of the earth about communicating with us as a player base. So I think they already do a great job. This is just an instance where they could improve. All right, so here's my interpretation of the events as I see them. Okay, this is 100% just my opinion. It's probably wrong. As I tell Mrs. Draconis almost every day, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. And I could be wrong now. I believe Grinding Gear Games has shown time and time again that they do not consistently differentiate between exploits that are bannable and bugs which are unintended features that remain throughout the duration of a league. GGG has made what I consider to be the best damn ARPG in the history of the world. This is the game that I play. I've got very, very little hobby time now, but when I've got it, I want to play Path of Exile. I want to talk about Path of Exile. I want to read about Path of Exile. I want to watch Path of Exile. Path of Exile is my hobby. Basically, Arsenal Football Club and Path of Exile. And then watching my kids do whatever my kids want to do. That's pretty much what I do in my time. That's my time, right? So POE is a pretty big part of my life. I really love it. I really enjoy it. I hope this doesn't come off as I hate POE and blah, 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 blah. I don't. I really enjoy it. I think it's, again, this is one of the things that makes POE special, is that players like POE and they care about it, and so they want to give constructive feedback about it. Grinding Gear Games has displayed time and time again inconsistency in adjudicating matters that require differentiation between bugs and exploits. There are a host of examples, and there's more. I stopped, but I listed like 5 or 6 of them in this discussion video, talking about synthesis, talking about delirium, talking about league stones, talking about Bestier, talking about players and exploits that have been found, and players don't get banned. Players don't get publicly called out and banned. Players aren't said from the game's creator, you're worthy of a ban in this case. GGG's actions speak louder than their words in the banning of players for exploits that only required using a new mechanic in a particular way that GGG maybe had previously not tested. Like, this isn't players breaking the terms of service, using some third-party program, doing something where they're downloading or messing with the data packets on the server. There's none of that. It's just players using the mechanic in a way that wasn't previously tested. So even if GGG wants to say, hey, this is a bug and this isn't the way that we intended to use it, just say that. Say that. And Chris did. In the first half of the post, he says, hey, we've changed the way that this is going to interact, and we changed the XP and the drops that are going to come from it. Okay, great. So then at least warn players or give them a heads up. And maybe those guys did get a warning or a heads up, and we're just not privy to it. But it doesn't look that way for the rest of us in the community. And frankly, as a player, it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous to interact with a new mechanic, because I go, well, if I discover something really cool and powerful, is that an exploit? Am I going to get banned? On the one hand, GGG wants to use players as the test community for mechanics and for servers and for policies, and then they may or may not punish players for creative usage of those mechanics, those servers, and those policies. Like, this is the gray area that I'm in. It's tough to get creative and to really push the boundaries in an environment where, when you push the boundaries and get creative, there's the potential for banning. I get if there's the potential of the bug or the exploit being taken away. That makes sense. But then a ban, and some of you, I'm sure, are going to say down in the comments, oh, but Iron, it's only a temp ban and their characters are only voided. They could always play on another account, or they'll be back in July. Yes, the point is there's nothing in the TOS, there's nothing in the communique that says, hey, this is how we're going to handle it in the future either. Maybe this time this was the warning. This was the slap. A ban for a whole league is only the slap on the wrist. Maybe next time it's permanent. Maybe it's an IP ban. I don't know. There's not really much precedent to go on, and there's not much communicate to go on. So it really does scare me as a casual player to go, oh, well, if I find something cool and I do it, I might get banned. That's really all it boils down to. Like, that makes me not want to do cool and fun things and test new things out. So how can we be the testing community to help test and give feedback if there's the potential that we find something cool and we give feedback and we get banned? Yeah, that's my interpretation. Thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion and for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments about what thoughts and ideas you've got on GGG's approach to bannable exploits and allowable interactions. Have I just totally, absolutely missed the boat on this? And am I wrong? Let me know down below in the comments. I always love to read your comments. I'm so glad to be able to have a little bit of time to talk and play POE. I'm so excited for this Ultimatum League, and I'm very stoked for the 2 builds that I'm going to be trying out this league. Hopefully your league is going well, and hopefully GGG sees this as an opportunity, as they oftentimes do, to improve communication with the player base. So I look forward to your communication with me down below in the comments. Thanks once again for watching, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.